Hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Vila Bianca, this is Skeptic Generation, and we need to talk. Today, I am by my little lonesome self. Eric is still not feeling great, and figured that I would just come on and chat with you guys myself. So welcome. I hope you all stick around. This should be fun. I do have a little bit of a rant to get into in a little bit, just because we can't not talk about the Dennis Prager quote that's circulating on Twitter right now. But yeah, welcome. If you are interested in calling the show or calling me, or if you have thoughts, we've already gotten some unhappy emails about the tweet of mine that went viral yesterday and is still currently doing those numbers. If you have conversations you would like to have about that, we could move into my old role as sex expert thingy, I guess. Yeah, so we can try that as well if you would like. You can call the show at 585-526-8774, or you can use the link tiny.cc/callSG to call and connect with our call screeners. You can call from anywhere in the world with that link. It is toll free. We pay for it on our end, so you should be all set and you have no excuses. Those are both in the description in case you're interested. All right. So we are going to talk a little bit about this Dennis Prager situation. So if you are on Twitter, you may already have seen this. If not, apparently Dennis has a call-in show like we do. And it's just him at his desk. I do like the set. I will have to give him credit for it. The set is very distinguished. It's about the only nice thing I can say about this. May need to call at some point. We may need to do that. Anyway, Dennis Prager, it says in this tweet, complains about a school sign. Now, Eric is not as online as I am, so I asked him, I was like, Eric, guess what the school sign says that Dennis Prager is upset about today. And, a couple guesses were thrown out. Does it have something to do with, like, sex education or, anything secular humanist related? No. The sign says, "The world is better because you are in it." And this got Dennis kind of miffed. He says, "What a stupid message. Plus, it's not true. What has any fifth grader done to have made the world better because he or she is in it?" Okay, so I get the thing where you're on air, online, you're live, and you need to manufacture a conversation with maybe something that wasn't going to go anywhere otherwise. I generally try not dissing fifth graders as my go-to. And being angry that they feel valued in the world. But, hey, to each their own. The thing that I want to kind of highlight here, though, apart from just how kind of cringy and awkward it is that this old man with a lot of money and a lot of time on his hands and a very large media empire has decided that this is something he cares about in a negative way, is okay, so let's put this idea front and center. Fifth graders don't make the world a better place just by being there. This same person is extremely pro-life or anti-choice. He is extremely nuclear family. He's an extreme nuclear family advocate to the point of bigotry. And at what point do these children then bring value into the world? Because half of your talking points are about how children do bring value into the world, specifically in ways that you believe are correct, but they shouldn't know about it. How dare you bring these children into the world and then tell them the world is a better place? And if you're going to go all logical, I guess, on me and be what has any fifth grader done? Okay, so where is the crux of your argument then? You don't get to do things until you're like an adult and then you get to make the world a better place. I don't know. It's frustrating and annoying that he gets so much attention, and I'm adding to it, I realize. But yeah, it's stupid. It's awful. And I will be watching this show though because I am morbidly curious. Yeah. Somebody said, I wish Dennis Prager's dad had told him he made the world a better place when he was in 5th grade. Maybe this PragerU situation wouldn't have been so much of a problem if Dennis felt like he was worthy at a young age. So, yeah, go tell your kids if you have them that they make the world a better place, if only to piss off Dennis Prager. All right. Yeah, that was my little FYI, here's what's happening on Twitter moment. If you would like to defend Dennis or argue that perhaps 5th graders make the world a worse place, feel free to give us a call. All right, so bear with me. I am in the process of producing and hosting at the same time. So we are going to be taking little bits of breaks while I update folks here. We've got somebody in New York, which is exciting. Looks like we've got someone in Tennessee. This is great. We'll get to all of you guys today. If you do call in early, you tend to get more time on the show and a better conversation because we're not trying to rush to the end. So definitely, if you can, call in earlier rather than later. All right, so we are actually going to start and hope that the audio works because it never behaves when it's just me. We are going to talk to Stephen in New York. And Stephen would like to talk about polyamory or politics. And honestly, both of those are good by me. So, Stephen, which one would you like to dive into today?
Well, we talked a couple weeks ago on Discord, and I posed the two things, and both things sounded exciting for both you and Eric. So I figured it'd be up to you, since I was supposed to call last week, and I didn't because some stuff came up. So it's either contention or agreement and conversation. Which would you rather have?
Well, I feel like I would love to have the polyamory conversation while Eric is on air as well. That way, you know, his viewpoints can also be heard on that since we are poly. I know that he would bow out gracefully if we went into the social democracy versus anarchism conversation. It's very possible a lot of our viewers will also bow out gracefully if we get too deep in the weeds on that one.
Indeed.
So let's start there and see where it goes and see if we can keep it accessible to as many people as possible, because not everybody are politics nerds like us.
Correct. Okay. So I guess we should start out with our axioms. I've seen that you're an anarchist. I don't know what kind, because there are many different types.
There are indeed.
I'm pretty safe in the assumption that you are not an ANCAP. So let's keep away from that. But are you like a syndicalist, or where are we with that?
Yeah. So for those of you who are curious, anarchism is a political, economic, organizational set of theories or beliefs about how people should organize themselves. Usually it is anti-state, anti-border, anti-government, and anti-capitalist. There are obviously many, many variations on that spectrum. For me, I tend to go with I call myself a small A anarchist, similar to how David Graeber calls himself a small A anarchist, in that I am comfortable working with most versions of anarchism in order to achieve end goals. I do see a lot of value in mutualism. I see a lot of value in syndicalism. So I see the practical implications of quite a few, but I wouldn't put myself firmly in any one camp right now.
Okay. I will say that I am not what is usually considered what is a new social democrat, which is from what I've been seeing, just rad libs, who are basically just liberals who want more social safety nets. My axiomatic values when it comes to social democracy are of like the 1800s to early 1900s social democracy, where my fundamental value is giving the workers the majority of power in whatever country they're in. It doesn't matter, and the fundamental difference between like social democracy in that old form and say democratic socialism is the end game. I don't have necessarily an end game. My only end game is the workers have all the power to make the decisions for the society that they're in. If they decide to do capitalism, that's that on them. If it's socialism or any other system at the end game, I don't care as long as the power is in the hands of the workers.
Okay, so I feel like we agree more than we disagree. In terms of like, I don't have a particular end goal either. My focus is really, the phrase that I really like is building a new organization in the shell of the old. So finding ways to mutually benefit each other in community within whatever system of government we happen to be experiencing. So kind of taking a lot of the bargaining power off of the table because we are providing a lot of the services for ourselves that the government otherwise could say, well, maybe we'll take away this right or this access if you don't do what we want. That would be less threatening if we were already doing that for each other in smaller circles. So it's a very similar outlook, I think. I'm certainly not of the idea that like someday we're going to go back to some kind of primitivist society across, know, all countries or anything.
Yeah, we're not anarcho-primitivists here.
Right. If only because I need glasses.
Sometimes as I'm living in the city, I really am tempted by the political theory of that. But I think our biggest argument against each other would probably be the need for a centralized government of some sort. When I look at like anarcho-syndicalism, it seems like the government is just taken over by the unions.
Yeah.
Which again I'm not against, but it seems like even anarcho-syndicalism, for example, has that. Like, yeah, we still have a government, but it's like we elect union reps and they kind of make the decisions and do all the stuff that government's supposed to.
Right.
I think that that's not a bad idea. I think that that's still something that I could be privy to. My only problem with anarchism on the whole is like the total demantalization of any sort of government in terms of like an overarching one. I think that if you just have small communes trying to deal with each other with trade or whatever, like let's say we have one town who has an iron mill and the next town over has the machine tools to make the iron into something, right? I think that if we just leave it up to both of those towns to kind of figure things out, it can become a little problematic, especially the more towns with specialized, because that's kind of the way I would see it happening. It would like towns would become specialized.
Yeah.
And I think that when you go into like the wider and wider as you like, go into like car manufacturing and you go into like making computers, it just becomes a little bit too difficult to not have an overarching government to be like, okay, well, we need to make sure the roads are, working between each of these towns and the railroads and everything like that. Because at that point, if you have these specialized towns, each doing each individual thing, who's really doing, like, we can't really have, it's going to be a little bit harder to do, like, intercontinental railroads or intercontinental travel.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So the overarching government, I think, is a little bit needed in that than just kind of decentralizing everything.
Yeah, and I think that there are like 5 different conversations we could have just about that concept. I do want to keep things pretty high level and moving quickly. As I say, as I dive into the history of pre-Christian Ireland. So do you know anything about how government was set up in pre-colonized Ireland?
I mean, I know a bit about the era of the chieftains, but I don't know which era we're talking about specifically.
Right, and I will admit this isn't like a deep knowledge source for me, but it is something that kept coming up as I was doing some research on my end. And it was essentially, there were many, many kings or chieftains that then each of those kings went to another court, and then each of those kings went to the high court. And so there was like 3 or 4 different groups of people involved in making decisions. And most of the time, the decisions were just working, to make sure that there were no big conflicts between the various kingdoms. But in situations where it would be like necessary to band together for things, they had that way of communicating with each other and advocating for their own needs. And the thing that I do want to dispel is this idea that anarchism is fundamentally opposed to government or democracy in any way, shape, or form. It's rather a critique of how it has currently become used. So it's currently like a top down, like the people who are rich and have a lot of resources and have a lot of power are making decisions for everybody else, whereas the goal ultimately would be to flip that and be bottom up. So like unions, where everybody gets that vote, and then there are representatives, right? And those representatives do then liaise with other reps or with the company. So it doesn't necessarily suggest that there is no government. It's just the way that we talk about democracy in the US is not actual democracy, and the goal is to get back to that and have it be more participatory. At least that's kind of the direction that I've taken that. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm not of the mind that any of the anarchist thoughts would be anti-democracy, other than, of course, anarcho-capitalism. But from my understanding of how Ireland worked, it wasn't great in terms of like, there were fights all the time, like bloody battles of like, well, this clan controls this river, and now they're, not allowing people to trade across this river unless that you do something for them, which would do like a chokehold on the inner clans within the island. And that's kind of what I'm foreseeing of not like anarcho-syndicalism. I think would work because you're basically just setting up a parliament of union reps, right? Mm-hmm. So like there could be some sort of government there, but there are some other forms of anarchism where I'm more leery about in terms of that issue, where if one town or system or commune or whatever you want to call it is like, we control this part of the river, we're going to charge you a ton of money to use this river, and all the other communes upriver are just screwed. Mm-hmm. And there's nobody really to deal with that over them, right? There's nobody to like say, no, you can't do that.
Well, I think those are two different things.
Conflict arises.
Well, I agree 100% that would be a problem. And one of the reasons that it was so tense during those more chieftain-based systems in Ireland was because the other side of it is not just clumping everything into their own communities, but also fostering the idea of, collaboration and community and, town halls, meeting with each other and talking things out. I do want to draw one distinction, and then we're going to have to wrap this up, at least for right now. And that is that there's a difference between nobody over them being able to make them do something and nobody being able to make them do something. And so there's this concept that unless there is some higher authority kind of dishing out the rules, that we're basically, it's every person for themselves. But I do think that if a group was like, hey, we don't want to participate on the same level as everybody else, we want to do this other thing, the options are not like call the government in to, regulate it or we're screwed. There are other options available. Yeah, they definitely would require more work on the parts of the individuals. And I think that's a big drawback for a lot of people around anarchism and probably social democracy too, which is like, oh, well, I want to be able to let the government do their thing so I don't have to think about it. And there would be a lot more requirement to actively participate and become part of your self-government, which can be daunting to a lot of people, especially those who have kind of kept politics at bay for whatever reason in their own lives. But yeah, I do think that this is an interesting conversation, and we agree more than we disagree. And hey, like, up until the point where we get to decide what happens after the unions own everything, I'm like right there with you, man.
Yeah, I'm sorry to the audience for. I thought this would be more contentious than it came out to be.
No.
But yeah, V, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling in, Stephen.
Of course.
Bye. All right, you guys. When it's just me, sometimes you have to deal with a little bit of conversation, like the politics of ancient Ireland and how it relates to anarchism, but hopefully that wasn't too painful. All right, let's talk with Nick in Tennessee. Nick in Tennessee, you have a question about what can atheists, skeptics, or non-believers use as a moral standard, which is an interesting conversation and that I would love to have with you.
Yeah, awesome.
Oh, there you are. Yes, perfect.
Okay. You may remember a few weeks ago, we had a conversation about the ethics of Noah's flood, right, and what exactly would make it wrong for God to. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I was bringing up the point that from the perspective of minimizing suffering, it could be said that God essentially murdering all those people could be merciful if the rest of their lives would have been predominated by suffering, right? At which point either you or Eric said that there are other standards beyond just minimizing suffering that we use to determine what's good and moral. Mm-hmm. And we were kind of towards the end of the call at that time. You had to move on. So I just wanted to kind of revisit that and say, like, all right, well, what standards should we use as non-believers to try and figure out what behaviors are moral, ethical, acceptable, preferable? Like, how do we figure that out now that we don't, have holy books and stuff to just give us all the answers?
That is a very big question, Nick.
Yes.
I think there is. I have some feelings about this one. The one that I would actually point you back to a conversation I think that happened last week with Alias, I think, where we talked about the conflict between harm reduction, which I think is kind of what we were talking about, that concept of minimizing suffering, and autonomy and consent, and how those can clash sometimes, because those are fundamentally two different ways of weighing whether something is moral. And there are areas where there are questions about, which do you prioritize? Because, like adhering to one would necessarily result in a loss of the other. So, harm reduction is one. Consent and autonomy is the one that I tend to gravitate the most to, with that harm reduction kind of a close second. And that's just the concept that, like, anything that violates the sacredness, the autonomy and consent of someone else is immoral. if they would not agree to it and it happened to them anyway and it could have been avoided, that is a problem. And we should work together to, resolve that and make sure that doesn't happen as much moving forward. And this could be anything from an individual being forced to do something they didn't want to do. That could hurt them either physically or mentally. This could be something as broad as, say, the ecological effects of climate change and how that is impacting certain lower income communities more. And so what are we doing that is violating the ability for those groups of people to consent to their water drying up or, having rain, like all of these things. So that is another thing to think about. I think for me, the biggest kind of mind-blown moment when I was deconverting was the idea that there was no one answer and that I could cherry pick. And people are going to take that out of context. I will come for you if I see this clip. But essentially what that looks like is there is not one right answer. There just isn't. If somebody says they have the one right answer, I would actually be very skeptical of that person, because most philosophical concepts by themselves in isolation make sense until you put them in the real world and follow them through to their logical conclusions, and it's hardly ever helpful. We can talk about skepticism all day, but if we were to follow skepticism to its logical conclusion in the real world as just a strict moral philosophy, we wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. It would lead right into hard solipsism. If we were to, talk about practicality and what does it mean to be pragmatic, if we move into pragmatics all the way and just commit to that 100%, that way lies madness. So it really does become a situation where you are responsible for owning what you consider to be your morality and backing that up however you see fit, which on the one hand is, again, a lot of work, because you don't get to just look at this one book or this one philosophy or this one person who seems to have it all figured out, be like, yes, that one please and thank you, don't need to think about it again, just run every situation down this checklist. If it meets those requirements, we're good. It becomes a lot more gray. It becomes a lot more fluid. And that can be very uncomfortable. But I, as an individual, could not tell you, Nick, what the nuance of your morality should be, apart from what I think mine is. And clearly I have convinced myself that mine are the best, which are, consent and autonomy and harm reduction. So, that was kind of a long answer. What are your thoughts?
No, that's overall, yeah, I get you that we kind of each have to find the standards that make the most sense to us. I guess my question too, more generally would be, so what kind of, I guess you said that the ones that you chose are the ones that feel the most right to you. So I guess I understand. Because when I've had conversations with theists, and I try critiquing God's moral system, right? Where God's like, it's okay for me to kill these people because I decided that they were bad. And I'm telling them that's not good, and then they're saying, well, that's God's rule system, and they've got their ethical system. So they like to say well, you've got your ethics and I've got mine. What's wrong with that? And so it feels very, I don't know, it's very frustrating to end that everybody has to find the moral system that fits them best, because there are people who believe some really terrible things about others for what they perceive to be moral reasons.
Yeah.
And then I have I have a question about specifically consent and autonomy when dealing with, say, prisoners or people that have wronged others in some way and need to be punished, but they're not going to agree and want to be punished. So any punishment that's inflicted on them is inherently a violation of their autonomy and consent. But we realize that for the good of our society, that kind of has to happen.
Right.
So in that framework, how then do you justify and decide how to evaluate punishment?
Well, yeah, I mean, both of those questions are huge. So let me break this down into the two parts that you kind of presented them. So the first part about theists saying, well, you have your ethics and I have mine. For the average, like, sans religious extremism actually hurting other people, cool. If we were in a world where the extremist Christian could go to their little church and there were, protections in place so that they couldn't hurt anybody, then, they get to live in their little bubble. And yeah, we can't force them to change how they are going to see the world. What we have to do is make sure that that viewpoint doesn't then infringe on other viewpoints. And it's very dishonest for two reasons. For especially, American Christians to use that argument against you. You have your ethics, I have mine. On the one hand, theologically, they don't believe that, right? So that is their way of saying I give up. Because if they truly believed that their morality was just their version of it and yours was just as valid, they would cease to be the type of religious person that they are a lot of the time. Not always, but the argument that Christianity makes is that they are correct and other people are not. And they have access to a higher law or a higher truth and you do not, or you are actively rejecting it. And so to say, well, I have my worldview and you have yours, to me, that always feels like they want to end the conversation as quickly as possible in a way that will get them out of it because they're uncomfortable. Because that's not really their worldview a lot of the time. So it's dishonest for that reason. It's also dishonest because it's one thing to say, I have my ethics, you have yours, when you are both on equal footing in a society. And ideally, that's where we would be. We would be in a situation where this person could believe that harm reduction was most important. This person could believe that autonomy was most important, and we could find a way to live together. But that's not where we are right now. We are in a situation where the theistic, especially the Christian nationalist worldview, is attempting to dominate other worldviews and enforce their morality and ethics onto others. So to say, well, you have yours and I have mine, erases the reality of what is actively happening based on their actions. So again, this isn't every person who you may have this conversation with, but in general, when someone says that and they are backing away from you, they are backtracking, they are telling you they don't want to talk about it anymore. And hey, you know what? If that's as far as you're going to get with that conversation, then that's as far as you're going to get. You could then have a conversation about, okay, you have yours, I have mine. What do we do now? How do we figure this out? And then they get to talk about how, well, yours is wrong for these reasons and mine is right for these reasons. And then you can get into the nitty gritty. But for the most part, it really does become a conversation of, okay, then how do we decide who gets to make the call? As opposed to, well, this is the basis of mine and this is the basis of yours. And a lot of the times that can actually be more helpful in figuring out where the other person is coming from. So for first part, how's that feel?
Feels good. Yeah. That the response that your description that they would kind of be trying to wrap up the conversation or move away from it kind of, I guess, summarizes the reactions I've seen fairly well. So I'll give that some thought. We can go on to the other half.
Absolutely. So the second half is actually a much bigger conversation because the idea of imprisonment and the prison system, again, specifically in the U.S., I cannot speak for outside of it, is a huge and complicated problem for a couple of reasons. One, currently, it is deeply corrupt, and let's set that aside because we're just going to get into, the prison industrial complex, and we don't need to do that today. Mm-hmm. So assuming that only people who were really a harm to other people were imprisoned, and mm-hmm. Assuming also that they had free will, which is a whole other problem.
Right.
Then, okay, we'll go with this scenario. Everyone has free will, and only people who are actually a harm to other people are in prison.
And if I might add, that the prison doesn't do anything like outright evil, like torture or starve or mistreat the people, other than just like secluding them.
Okay. Yeah. In that case, the conversation would become a utilitarian one, at least if I was the one having the conversation. So utilitarianism is essentially the most simplistic version that everybody knows is Spock, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And it's just kind of this concept of, all right, if you have this situation where your morality is repelled by both options, right? On the one hand, you are taking away the autonomy of an individual, and on the other end, if you do not do that, harm will come to other people. It really does become a case-by-case basis. I don't think that this is something that has one big blanket answer, apart from, will reducing the autonomy of person A result in more people being able to exert their own? Because if person A is harming somebody, the assumption is that they are doing so without the other people's consent. And if the goal is to maintain the most people maintaining consent, then you would need to then remove the thing that was taking that consent away, even if that was another person. So at that point, it becomes a numbers game. And that's a really weird, cold way to look at it. And every case obviously would be different, but it would truly become, okay, if consent and autonomy is my goal, taking harm reduction off the table for a second, if somebody is harming other people, they are violating autonomy and consent of those people. And one person's autonomy and consent weighs the scale less than potentially 5, 10, 20 people's autonomy and consent. And so that would be how then I think a lot of people would make that call.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. And it's all just, it's uncomfortable to talk about too, because it then becomes, I'm taking these people's autonomy and playing this game with math with them. But it really is the only way that I've found that can allow for some kind of moral structure outside of just blindly obeying, well, everyone who does this gets this amount of time in prison, and, regardless of any other circumstances, everybody is going to have to deal with this. Like, it ends up being a situation where too many people are taken advantage of and too much harm is done, proportionate to what would have been done if nothing had happened. And now I'm rambling. Nick, thoughts?
That's good. I'm following along fairly well. See, I'm trying to think what, playing the devil's advocate a bit, how the theist would respond. I guess the roadblock that I would run into is what makes autonomy a good moral standard to use? Like why that instead of utilitarianism? Because like autonomy allows people to risk harm and to do things that we know to be unwise, like smoke or drink or whatever else. And by allowing them to express themselves how they feel, we are allowing them to hurt themselves, right? And we know that when we are responsible for somebody else's health, i.e. if we are the guardian of a child, and we see that child about to consume something toxic, that we have to intervene and inhibit their autonomy for their own safety and well-being. Mm-hmm. So I think the theist would say that autonomy is not an acceptable, highest moral standard, because it's more important that people be healthy or kept safe or whatever other metric or standard, something that they would base in their theistic dogma, right? And they're God says this, so that's arbitrarily, objectively the right thing. And so if somebody were to ask, how would you justify making or using autonomy and quote unquote free will as your standard for morality, how do you back that up in instances where that includes allowing people to commit self-harm or do other reckless, dangerous behaviors, etc.?
Right. And I think that there are, again, a couple of parts. I do want to make sure that we are keeping harm reduction on the table. I think that there are people who probably just have autonomy as their, like we were talking about ANCAPs earlier. There are people who just have autonomy as their moral structure without the harm reduction piece, and that can be harmful, absolutely. We need that harm reduction component in order to do exactly as you said. Oh, that person is in danger of hurting themselves without knowing it. I'm going to intervene and reduce the amount of harm that is about to happen. So again, gray area, but you absolutely need that harm reduction piece. That said, a lot of my and a lot of people's reason for gravitating to autonomy as a moral structure or a value is that, and Christians will understand this. Like the theists that you're talking to will get it. If you say, okay, let's say we take autonomy off the table. Goodbye First Amendment, goodbye Second Amendment, goodbye all freedom to do what you think is best for yourself. Someone else is going to decide that for you. Would you be comfortable with an atheist government deciding what is healthy and right for you? And obviously, if they are anything like the Christians in my life, that would be an absolute no. No, of course not. Right. Okay, so either the only way that we get out of the autonomy as being a necessary moral value is actually establishing a universal moral truth. Once we have that, maybe we don't need autonomy as much anymore. But it's a stopgap measure, because otherwise we are constantly going to be told by competing ideologies what is healthy and right to do. And that's unsustainable. So at that point, that Christian that you're talking to is going to have to do one of two things. They're either going to have to acknowledge that autonomy is necessary for them to practice their faith just as much as it is anything else, or they're going to have to double down on, but mine is correct, which invalidates what they said previously, which is, well, you just have your ethical worldview and I have mine, right? You can't have both. If they want to get out of that conversation without having to prove absolutely that their moral structure is correct, they need to accept that autonomy is a necessary moral value, because otherwise they're going to get themselves into hypothetical situations where their church is being told by an atheist government that it's not healthy to congregate on Sundays anymore, right? So we need that autonomy piece, not because by itself it is some ideological goldmine, but because otherwise we leave ourselves open to other people telling us what is moral, other people telling us what to do with our bodies in ways that we cannot trust and ways that conflict with each other. So practically, it's kind of a necessary component unless you're advocating for some kind of theocracy.
Okay. So when, I guess a contingent I would hear is when we advocate for autonomy and like informed consent and, better education for people, like for kids, for example, so that they can make good decisions. And then they get upset because we are trying to teach kind of an acceptance of things that they view as immoral, and they get upset because they feel they have a right to teach their kid their morals how they feel like it. Is that a violation of the parents' consent or the parents'
autonomy?
Yeah, autonomy to teach their kids the system that they believe is correct.
Well,
We wouldn't want a Christian religion teaching kids creationism only in schools.
Right.
So,
And the problem with that line of questioning very quickly becomes apparent when you ask, well, what about the child's autonomy? And the unfortunate fact of the matter is that a lot of religious people do not see children as full humans. Dennis Prager, what did a fifth grader ever do to make the world a better place? Right? So they don't see children as also having consent and autonomy. And so it becomes... Sorry, what now?
Wasn't the Virgin Mary about the age of a fifth grader?
Oh, shit. It's very possible.
Anyway, sorry, continue.
So, no, exactly. So, like, the concept of, well, what do I get to do with my children breaks down if you really are adopting an autonomy-based worldview, because you need to either admit at that point children aren't humans with autonomy and the ability to consent, or, children are. In that case, the goal is to protect the autonomy of the child. And if the child is not consenting to being indoctrinated or being told misinformation, then that is a violation of those children's consent. So it does then become a conversation about, do you see children as people? And unfortunately, in this country, children don't have rights. And a lot of abuse happens because of that worldview, that children are not full people and they don't get consent and autonomy until they're adults. So yeah, at that point, it becomes a whole different conversation around, well, are children capable of autonomy and consent to you? Because that should be the conversation. What are the kids consenting to? And what are they capable of consenting to? As opposed to, what do I get to do with my property? Because property is a completely different conversation to have, right? If they were like, what do I do with my car or the trees in my yard? Like, those then become, oh, well, is it actively hurting someone? No? Cool. Do what you want, right? But, yeah.
There's an argument that the kid doesn't know that what they're being taught might be harmful, in the same way that a child may not know that what they're about to consume is toxic. And the parent, as the guardian of the child, is responsible for making decisions about what things are, safe or unsafe for the kid. And so I think they would view it as like other people imposing harmful beliefs and whatnot on their children.
And at that point, then they get right back into, well, how do you know it's harmful? Because my view is correct. How do you know? If they are going to make the positive claim that teaching children sex education or using pronouns in front of children or, whatever they are freaking out about, is actively harmful, they're going to have to come with evidence. And that's where the skepticism piece comes in. Because it's not enough for them to just say, I think it's harmful, therefore I'm going to violate someone else's right. If someone is walking out into the street and there's a bus coming, everybody knows what is going to happen if they don't get out of the way. You can pull them out of the way. And there's a very good reason for that. If you say X belief system or this information that is vital to growing up as a healthy person is going to hurt my child, you're going to have to explain objectively why that hurt, what that hurt is, and what's going to happen. Or you're going to have to, again, say, my worldview is correct. I'm advocating for a theocracy. So, yes, if they want to make the claim that X thing is harmful for a kid, where are the stats? How do we determine that? What are the stories that those kids have told upon growing up? You know, all of these kinds of conversations can be had. We don't need to shut them down, but we need to make sure that what we're doing at that point, once harm is brought into the equation, is that that harm is being actively proven and that we can tell that that is borne out and then make a decision. If they're saying, well, it's harmful because I don't agree with it, that's just saying I'm right, you're wrong. And then they need to prove that they're right.
Okay, yeah, fair.
Yeah, it's windy. So, it is windy, man. Like, it's not, there's no one silver bullet, but having all of these in your back pocket, I think, will definitely help.
Yeah, for sure. And I get it if you need to go to another caller. But I was curious about circling back around to the, I guess, their conclusion that, or when they say, well, you have your beliefs and I have mine. I think when I have heard that used, it's kind of in, I want to say almost a Pascal's wager kind of context, where it's like, well, if your moral system is correct, then everybody just gets to choose what they feel like, and I feel like going with the Bible, what's wrong with that? Whereas if talking from their perspective, whereas if my ethics are correct, then following God is right, so I should do that. So in either instance, following God makes the most sense. Does that make sense?
That does, and I've definitely encountered that as well. And again, that's why that harm reduction piece has to come into play, right? You can talk about consent and autonomy, and I encourage people to do so, but you have to pair it with that harm reduction piece, because that is what is going to actually, engage that part of the conversation. Well, if you are believing that, autonomy is so important, it's my autonomous choice to decide that I get to run my car into the flea market, right? Like that, okay. But also now we bring in that harm reduction piece. You get to do whatever you want to do as long as it's not harming other people. And if we can see that it is, and again, we're going to have to come up with the proof that it is harmful, and we can do that in the case of, religious overreach, then that is objectively wrong as you can get. So if they are granting autonomy and they are granting harm reduction, you guys have a lot of common ground that you can play on. Whether or not you think those two values come from a God or not is a separate conversation. But if you can get them to agree that consent and autonomy is valuable, because otherwise, they would be told what to do by atheists or whatever, hypothetical you want to scare them with. And that harm reduction is a positive, because otherwise, why would you care if we were teaching your kids things you thought were harmful? Clearly, you do value harm reduction. All right, now we both agree that autonomy and harm reduction are values we should be looking at. What else is needed to make decisions? Or can we start making decisions that honor both of our worldviews using these values? And as long as they're willing to grant those things and then bring evidence to the table when they claim that something is harmful, honestly, a lot of the problem goes away.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. This was a lot of fun. I feel like my brain just went to the gym. I hope yours does as well. We do need to move on to the next caller, but Nick, I know that you're having some interesting conversations on your end of things. Feel free to call back and let us know how things go. If you have other questions about how to engage with theists, or if anybody out there does, this is my kind of conversation. I love this. Good luck.
Yeah, thanks.
Of course.
Have a good day.
Bye. All right, you guys. We are going kind of slow today, getting into some deep stuff. We do have a theist on the line, Joe from Kansas, that I am interested to talk to. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hi, V.
Hello. You have a question about criticizing faith without saying it's willful ignorance or gullibility, and I'm really interested to have this conversation with you. What have you got?
This is just a topic that I guess I've run into while perusing the Skeptic community on YouTube. There's conversations about all kinds of things, and of all people, this was a Kent Hovind debunk that I was watching, just a little bit of mindless entertainment, and the person who was making the video was saying, was an atheist themselves, and was saying, while they are probably in the minority in the scientific community, there are, real biological, PhD evolutionary biologists who also are Christians and believe in God, and, even though they believe in what I guess you would call divine evolution, the idea that, yes, evolution exists and is 100% real and has the, the lever of God attached to it.
Right.
And the thing that I couldn't get out of my head was, and the person said, all of these people are real doctors and really, this is no charlatan anybody. They didn't, they didn't get their doctorate in quotes from a degree mill. These are real dyed-in-the-wool scientists. And I just couldn't get out of my head. The thing was, the person saying, everyone takes something on faith, and I cannot remember the Bible quote off the Bible verse off the top of my head, but it's faith is belief belief in what we do not see, evidence that doesn't exist. Belief. Yes, I don't have the quote in my head.
I don't either. We're fine.
You know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And
the chat will let us know.
So, you what?
The chat will let us know. They'll find it.
Yeah. So you can say that these people are scientists, and you can also say they're Christians, but if they're Christians, it's almost inevitable to say that they also have faith in their God. Faith is what they use to believe in something. So you've said, so where's the disconnect? Because if they're a scientist and you say they're a real scientist and they've done real scientific work, then how do you then say oh, I believe they're a scientist and I have respect for them, but also they have faith, which basically means they're gullible people who are willfully ignorant.
Right.
Which to me, and this is an argument I've had in comment sections more times than I care to admit, if you're saying someone has faith or, this is willfully ignorant, gullibility, whatever you want to call it, you're essentially saying they're stupid. It's tiptoe around it, but you're saying they're stupid.
Kind of. I think that is actually the crux of this, Joe, which is everybody has blind spots that influence how they see the world, how they do their work, even if they are really good at that work. So for me personally, I cannot speak to the comment section of atheist videos because, oh my god.
And I try not to lump everybody into that.
Nobody needs that kind of.
That's a dangerous place to go.
No, you need to hold your breath and go in small dunks at a time. But what I would say, is that, yes, there are absolutely scientists, even, evolutionary biology-based scientists who know what they're doing and have correct information to provide us and also believe in a God. The thing is, if you are a evolutionary biologist who believes in a God and you believe in this concept of, you call it divine evolution, the idea that God kind of jump-started everything, that's not accessible to you in a lab. that is something that you are bringing to the table, but that idea won't necessarily influence the way you're doing your work. In the same way that I can believe that Lord of the Rings is the best trilogy ever written and still go in every day and help people publish their books, and my day-to-day job doing something related to books is not influenced by that belief, unless somebody comes up to me and says, this is the best trilogy ever written, and then I'll say, no, you're wrong, and we can have that argument. But there is a component of faith there that everybody who is an evolutionary biologist is bringing to the table, because it doesn't deal with that. If someone was a young Earth creationist and an evolutionary biologist, I would have questions. But if you're making a claim that isn't on the table, that doesn't really impact the work that's being done on the table, then we can argue about that. But I'm not going to automatically assume that the work you're doing in this unrelated area is wrong. So there's that. But also, I do want to make this clear, everybody has those blind spots. And when we bring up, or at least when I bring up, the blind spot of faith in a God that is being accepted without that deeper diving into apologetics and the history of the church and all of that, then what I'm saying is not, this person is stupid for believing this. I'm saying, I know I have blind spots, and I want people to point them out to me so that I can go and examine them. This is one of yours, and I'm giving you the opportunity to dive in and explore that. And the only place where willful ignorance comes into play at all is in how that conversation is received, as long as it's being done respectfully on the other end. Because if you go up to someone and you're like, you're stupid, okay, bye. You don't need to engage with that person. But if someone's honestly bringing you a problem with your worldview, or an inconsistency, or just something you haven't thought about before, if you decide to put that on the table and walk away from it, that is willful ignorance. And that's not unique to Christians or to theists at all. I've encountered that time and time again in the atheist community. So yes, it is calling out willful ignorance if somebody has been told multiple times about an area where they are not aware and they have never decided to go look into it anymore. But that's the only situation where that could really be considered willful ignorance. Just believing in a God isn't willful ignorance, nor is it stupidity. It's just one of the areas where maybe you need to look into a little bit more. And everybody has those. So that's kind of where I come from.
Is your example on the book publishing aspect of Lord of the Rings, but I can still publish other books or help publish other books was a great analogy. I hadn't viewed it quite in that, I guess, in that aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or, if we were to say books were invented in the 1600s by a guy who fell out of a tree, hit his head on a rock, and imagined the first book in all its entirety. Okay, cool. My belief that that's how books were invented isn't going to impact my day-to-day publishing books, right? Unless somebody's like, no, and I believe that every author should fall out of a tree and hit their head on a rock before being published, right? Then we might have a problem. But believing in how something got started and engaging in a field of work or research that is not directly tied to that belief, yeah, there might be a little asterisk there. If you're like, hey, V is one of the primary book publishers in Austin, Texas. V also believes that books were invented in the 6th century by, XYZ. Then maybe there's a little bit of a, okay, well, I'm going to have to see. How is V's work? How does V do their work? And then you make the call from there, right? And that's an individual decision. But to say that I am not good at my job because of that belief would be making an assumption. And that is also willful ignorance, because then you jump to that conclusion and make a decision without actually looking into it, right?
Sure.
So that's my 2 cents. What are your thoughts?
I guess that's as you said, is as long as your example of if someone is is an evolutionary biologist and also a young Earth creationist, then those are two things that conflict heavily.
Right.
But like being an astronomer and also a young Earth creationist. Then so long as the two things aren't directly contradicting one another or very closely coming to contradict one another, then it doesn't quite matter. That's not really the right word. But,
right. You can't make an assumption that one is directly correlated to the other in that person's mind if they aren't necessarily correlated. So
right.
You would have to probably go research, right? Like if I were given a piece of compelling information by an evolutionary biologist who also happened to be a Christian, I would do a little bit more research. Did they get their diploma from a legitimate university? What other papers have they published? Like, have they come out and done an interview where they talk about how their faith interacts with their work? Like, all of those things I would then look into, but I couldn't just learn this evolutionary biologist is a Christian. Well, I'm tossing this paper out. That would be jumping to a conclusion, and that would be a blind spot that I would have as an atheist that I would need to dive into,
Sure. And I guess I'm going to kind of veer off in another direction here just for a moment. But as you described, since everyone has blind spots, it's okay to say, willful ignorance isn't just believing in a God. It's how you got to that point, and have you looked at it closer? Have you examined it?
Yeah.
And I think in that regard, that almost causes a couple problems of its own, seeing as how some things have to be marked as in the category of the unknowable. Because I don't think I called in. This was a month or two ago. I don't think you were on. I'm pretty sure it was the episode that Russell Glasser was on. And I called in and asked about a conversation I had with someone who was an agnostic atheist. Say, I don't believe in a God, but I'm open to being convinced.
I do remember that call.
It says, and then the aspect was, they said the only way you could prove to me that Jesus crucified and died and then rose from the dead 3 days later was if I could see, if he was crucified and brought down, if I could see a modern day autopsy done on him and be able to have someone specifically say, yes, this person is 100% dead, and then see the same person walking around 3 days later. And the thing was, that person, to me, is no longer an agnostic atheist. That's a Gnostic atheist. Because if your only standard of evidence requires a time machine, you're not open to being convinced.
That is a good rule of thumb. I've got one similar, which is if you have to appeal to hard solipsism, I win.
Right.
But if you need something that is impossible in order to prove something to you, then up until that thing can be proven, you are agnostic about it, and that needs to be something that you cannot make a claim about that thing until the ability to prove it to your satisfaction exists. So maybe one day when time machines happen, that person, can get their evidence. But until then, if they cannot make a very firm claim about X thing beyond, I don't know, right? And so for me, that is applicable both directions. And so I'm not going to say that you are not sufficiently convinced of a God, and maybe those criteria have been met for you. But in my worldview, I do not see a way for that to actually be proven to me. And so I consider that a question that is unanswerable currently. And so I cannot make an assertion whether or not said God exists. I need to be in the space of I don't know if I'm going to be, actively like consistent in my own brain. And if a Christian or a theist says, I also don't know, then we get to have the conversation. Okay, so what are we choosing to do with that lack of knowledge? And how is that informing other beliefs and other parts of our worldview? And that can be a really interesting conversation to have. But yeah, absolutely. If the requirements for meeting for provability are impossible, then you are agnostic about that claim.
And yeah, is the bringing up this for you? You said there hasn't been something that has been an answer that has sufficiently answered the question for you. Then I guess that applies to everyone else as well, and goes back to can someone be an evolutionary biologist and also a Christian? Because even if they believe evolutionary biology, Christianity their Christian faith could be just reduced to personal experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as long as they don't bring that ability to accept a thing
and
based
as long
on
as it doesn't affect
right, exactly, and that's
the science part of it,
right, and that's the whole ball game. If you want to believe something, and you're going to be able to keep it in a space where it doesn't negatively impact other people or your work, like, I have no problem with you. And I'm not going to make assumptions about other people in your life or your work without seeing for myself, skepticism, what that actually, what your faith does in those situations. It's the only asterisk there, again, is, okay, well, if this person is saying that they believe things based on personal experience, that does conflict with the scientific method. So let's just make sure that when they're actually doing science, they're following these rules and not the ones they've set up for themselves outside of those rules.
Right. It's not, 2 + 2 = 4 because that's how I feel about it.
Right.
It's 2 + 2 = 4 because logic and et cetera.
Right. Yeah. Joe, I hope that this helped. I know that watching these, refutations on YouTube, especially about people who I'm pretty sure you also disagree with in terms of how they're using their faith, can be so frustrating. But I hope that
I need to stay off YouTube.
It's a choice. Hopefully this helped, and hopefully this gave you a little bit of clarity that when you go into these conversations in the YouTube comments, Godspeed, you are able to maybe dive into things a little bit more deeply with the people who want to have that conversation with you.
Right. Thanks, Steve.
Absolutely. Thank you for calling in.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Okay, you guys, we have got time for one more caller, and we do have one on the line. Let me just write up. Oh my goodness. No, go back. What are we doing? Clear. There we go. Let me just write up this individual, and then we will get started. Reminder that we do super chats, and we read them at the end of the episode. We, this week being me. All right. This is Alias from Wyoming. Asking, should I tell someone the truth or let them live in a happy fiction? Oof. Alias, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, V. Yeah, it's afternoon for y'all still. Well, I think, yeah. But it's great to talk to y'all again. I used to frequent the show, and then my phone line got cut off, and I couldn't talk to y'all anymore, and I missed y'all.
Well, welcome back.
Oh, hi, Eric. I didn't want to ignore you either.
Oh, Eric's not here today. It's just me.
Oh, just you today? Oh, okay, cool. Well, you're the one I'm scared to debate.
Well, hopefully we won't have too much debate.
A debate goal.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I got some news, and me and a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, knew exactly what this news meant. It was a math problem of what does 10 - 9 equal. And I tried my best to let this person like know that there's no hard feelings, and I didn't want to hurt them. But when I told them the truth, like I watched their entire reality sink out of their face.
Oh.
And I'm like, well, I don't want to go into it. I got really big news, and this guy thought it was his big news. And so then I asked him what 10 minus 9 equals, and he says 1. And I was like, and then we realized that he realized that I was talking about October and January.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. And then I told him that 10 plus 4, or 10 plus minus 9 does not equal 4 or 5. And he's like, and as soon as he realized what I was talking about, like, he died a little. I mean, I am not happy about the way that I made him feel. And that's kind of like why, he met me for the first time, and I spent 4 hours doing everything I could to be his best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to make a community together instead of a fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did my best to ease them in. It's like when you take the dog out to the farm and let them play for all the hours because they've got cancer. That's what I was trying to do. Is I was trying to make them feel as good as possible, because I knew the potential of how much reality was going to hit them. But should there be exceptions to that? Because I don't know if I did the right thing in that situation.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a little bit lost on the specifics, but I think we can still have a good conversation about the bigger question. So
we had a girlfriend. He's dating
Alias.
her now, and I was dating her before. That's the
got it. Okay. Things made more sense now. Okay.
Thing just clicked for you now too, huh?
Oh yeah. Okay. That does change things. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. So in that situation specifically, you definitely did the correct thing in letting your friend know, just because that would be something that I think most people would want to know about prior to raising a child. That said, it really is a case-by-case basis, and it depends on whether or not you think you would be a better person telling them versus not. And honestly, that's going to be your call 90% of the time. There are people who I know are mistaken about things that I may have even told them were mistakes that then just continue on because it makes them feel good. At what point do I then say, okay, I either need to allow this mistake to make them happy, or I need to become aggressive in how I talk about it, and what will that do to the relationship?
Right, and that was one thing that I was trying my best at all to avoid, was any type of aggression, because I wanted to make them feel loved and welcomed.
Yeah.
Because we break it down to it, he's kind of the one that has the least say in the matter, so I'd like to be as cordial as possible.
That makes sense.
So that, yeah, because I don't want to hurt him, because he's not he's a great person.
Yeah.
He hasn't done anything wrong to me, so I didn't want to make a conflict where I could have avoided one.
Right.
But at the same time, this is going to be the first chance for a dad to be in my family's life for 120 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
We've had, me and my dad were both distant with our kids. Both of us were we were there, gone, and there and gone. So we weren't a stable part of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had dads of family members of mine die when the kid was young. The dad got run off when the kid was young. But my brother spends most of his time either in jail or running from the law and leaving his significant other to raise the kids.
That's rough, man.
yeah, we had the first time in 120 years that we can unfuck this situation.
Yeah.
And
that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself for one interaction. Is all. Like, I will say, yes, there are always situations where you are going to need to make that call, and sometimes it will be the correct one, and sometimes it won't be. In this case, this is something that this person should know, and you seem to have done it in a way that was not unnecessarily aggressive. Cool. You cannot own his feelings. You cannot own what somebody else feels if you have done your best and are willing to, I don't know, like, apologize if you've done something that's hurtful. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. But, like, what they feel in that moment after getting information that is necessary is theirs to deal with. And putting that amount of pressure on yourself is only going to make you more anxious and maybe less likely to tell someone something important next time. So I think it's always a case-by-case basis, but thank you for sharing this story. That was kind of like a little like Agatha Christie mystery where, like, at the end you get that last bit of information and you're like, oh, I see.
I'm glad you build up the suspense then.
My gosh.
I'm glad that I was able to keep you in suspense. Like I said, I'm a little bit afraid of your brain still.
Oh my gosh. Well, me too. You and me both.
I'm glad I was less of an asshat than last time, and you got to do super chats, right?
We do indeed do super chats. That's correct.
All right. Well, V, thank you so much for having me on, and I will call you all here in a month or two to talk about something random when it comes up.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for calling. All right. All right, for those of you who are still a little confused, apparently there was, this is what I'm assuming from the conversation, a pregnancy, and the two guys were confused about whose it was, and they did a little math, and there was a disappointment for one of them. But that was a little story time to end out the show, I guess. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I am going to read through these super chats. There is no after show today, but the Discord is always open. Feel free to jump in there. The link is in the description to chat with other people who watch the show, who like to talk about skepticism and counter apologetics and all of that. So there is a community there for you if you want to partake. All right, let's read a couple super chats. We do have a few. RG sent the weekly banana. Thank you, RG. RG also sent $2.99 and a little, I guess, like a oh well emoji. I'm not quite sure what that's about, but that's kind of been my vibe all day. So feeling it. The Eye sent $10 and says, it's Steve. Forgot to wish you a happy Maybon V. I hope you were doing something special. Going out in my community in my full regalia. Let's see what the reactions are. Nice. Thank you, Steve. Maybon is I believe it's starting on the 21st or the 22nd. I am going to be decorating my house for fall and also going to be baking and cooking up a storm for the upcoming week. So I'm going to be doing as many weird and wonderful things with apples and pumpkins as you possibly can. I'm very excited. Moldred sent $5.55. Says, I missed the last two shows. Did you expand your knowledge on the diversity of furry fandom? Thank you, Moldred. We did actually. We had a couple people call in and a couple comments that set us straight. Thank you, everybody who is always willing to call out things we know less about than we should. And then Kendall Brass sent $10 as well. Thank you, Kendall. Says, great job today, V. Hope Eric feels better soon. Wishing you all a good day from South Texas. Thank you so much, Kendall. Eric, I think will be feeling better shortly. We've done COVID tests, not COVID, just, feeling a little under the weather. But I know that he missed being here today. All right, everybody, thank you so much. If you are interested, we are coming up on the end of the month, and this studio does not pay for itself. If you would be interested in helping us out, feel free to go to patreon.com/skepticgeneration. We have free stuff for everybody, including like the ad-free versions of all of the podcasts and videos, as well as behind-the-scenes footage every week. That can be kind of fun and goofy for those of you who are interested. So yeah, I knew Eric would want me to pop that in there before we close out officially. All right, you guys, until next time, I'm really glad we had this talk.